People have told me I've given up, like, oh, you shouldn't have done that. Oh, that wasn't professional. Oh, you have to be aware of burning bridges. And I'm just like, if the bridge is at risk of being burned anyways in the first place, let it burn.
Hello, and welcome to Working Your Way, the podcast dedicated to exploring the journey of authenticity in the workplace and discovering how to navigate it your way. I'm your host, Sandhya Sudhakar, and my guest today is Mimi Gonzalez. Mimi is a founder, a consultant, a community organizer, and a creative who is passionate about making this world a better, more equitable place and about centering the topic of grief in our day-to-day lives. She's currently developing her platform, griefsense, to make the topics of death, loss, and mortality more accessible to everyone, especially young people that come from minoritized identities. Today, we're diving into a profound and deeply personal topic: how grief and loss can shape our careers and inspire us to make meaningful change. In our conversation, we explore Mimi's experiences in the corporate world and her transition to entrepreneurship. And we talk about how navigating grief has been a common thread throughout her life and career. And in this episode, we're discussing the importance of building a personal brand, finding safe spaces, and advocating for yourself in the workplace. All right, let's get into it. Okay, Mimi, welcome to Working Your Way. I'm really excited to have you on.
Thanks. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
I feel like this conversation's probably going to get really deep really quickly. So
Oh, yeah.
let's start with a big question.
I'm ready. Let's go.
I love that. And I love a deep convo. I'd love to hear just a little bit about what are some things about your identity that you hold really closely?
Yep. Definitely going to get really deep here. I love it. One of the aspects I definitely hold close is I am a lifelong griever. I am a serial griever, so someone who has experienced lots of grief. So, 20 people died in my life before I turned 25. So that's a lot of loss because one loss is honestly one too many. But I definitely say that's like a core aspect of my identity because it really shapes like my worldview about work, about relationships, about life, about having fun, just like literally everything.
Yeah, and that is such a big part of your story, and we will definitely touch on that. But I'd love to hear a little bit about early in your career as well. I know you graduated with a bachelor's and a master's and went to work for a big product-based company in the kind of home improvement tools space. So
Yep.
what was that experience like for you?
Ooh, honey, that is a loaded question, but let's see if we can break it down. Well, I'll also just give some brief intro about my background. So
Yeah.
born and raised in Hartford. I'm a first generation Afro-Latina based here in Hartford, Connecticut. And, just being first generation anything comes with its challenges, but I would say it also comes with its blessings as well. And I think just being that first generation person graduating, like I was the first person to graduate high school in my family, let alone college, and then going off to corporate. Like no one in my family even knew what is corporate, like what even is that, and like I would often find myself having to like wash down what I actually do for my career because I know my family wouldn't really understand. But that experience was definitely really impactful and really helped me. And so like my background educationally was in organizational psychology. So I was just super obsessed with organizational development and like looking at business problems from a really like high level view and how we can try and like just mend relationships, build relationships, cross-pollinate within an organization to solve all of these problems. And I think that definitely comes from my community organizer background. That's something I didn't mention before, but being from Hartford, Connecticut, there's a really big like activist community over here, and I was brought into that. Like I grew up being an activist all my life, and it was definitely like oil and water, not going to lie, working in corporate again, being first generation and having that like activist grassroots approach to things. But at the same time, I feel like it really helped me be successful in corporate because I didn't have time. I didn't have time to waste. I didn't like, I'm here to get my experience, build these relationships, and grow and succeed in my career, right? Like I am the first in my family to do all of these things. I don't have time to waste, right? So it was kind of one of those things where I cut the BS and, I was able to accomplish a lot in such a short amount of time. But what does that do? That brings a lot of challenges when it comes to ageism, because I was always the youngest person on my team or the only like Latino person on the team. And with all of this, that I'm saying, like, for instance, at 24 years old, I became the chief of staff to the chief diversity officer of Stanley Black & Decker. And that was an awesome experience being able to have that so young, but all of the other chief of staffs were late 30s to early 50s. And I'm 24. They're like, who does this young girl like think that she is, And
Yeah.
thankfully, the CEO's chief of staff at the time was really such a big sponsor and support to me. Shout out to Allison Lawrence. Without her, I literally would not have been able to do all of the things I was able to do because she she gave me creative freedom. And I think leaders within the workplace need to be able to do that to their younger employees and also any employee that comes from a minoritized identity. Like, give them creative freedom and see what they will do and they will impress you. And I'm not trying to like toot my own horn or anything, but like I was able to have a lot of impact in a short amount of time. But if it weren't for people like Allison or, you know, my experience with grief or my experience with community organizing, those are real lived experiences that were able to make me be successful at such a young age.
Yeah, I mean, I think we
Yeah.
can toot your horn. If you're not going to toot it yourself,
Yes, sir.
I'll toot it. Like, you're an incredibly impressive person at a very young age, and
Okay.
you have done so much and like become so much and all of these things, right? By your mid 20s. I think it's so interesting to me. I kind of reflect on like in an inclusive world, like some of us are late bloomers, some of us like start from the beginning, and how it all comes together. It's so interesting to see and hear. And I think the way that you have empowered yourself is really very inspiring. It's inspiring for
Thank
someone like
you.
me who's significantly older than you and
Oh, stop.
had, moments in my 20s where I was like, oh man, I wish I would have had that like gumption, earlier on. But I'm curious about the idea of like having an upbringing that's rooted in activism.
Mhm.
It teaches you to use your voice and to call out things that aren't working. And then you go into a corporate environment where most corporate environments tell you to go with the flow and fit in the box. And so, what was the experience of navigating like, this is what I know to be how I operate in the world, and now I see how I have to operate in this company. Like, what's the tension like?
Mm. Well, I'm just going to bring the most famous saying that we think is hitting when it really isn't, in my humble opinion. But just the whole bring your authentic self to work thing, like it just really never resonated with me just because I felt like the only way I survived corporate was by code switching,
Yeah. Mm.
and assimilating. Like I felt like that was really the only way I was able to get that success. Not only like it's kind of one of those things, it's not an either or, it's an and also. Like I feel like there were moments where, I definitely code switched for sure. Like, I did the straightening the hair in an interview. I did the whole, oh, I'm not going to speak up because I'm scared out of retaliation of my job, like all of those things. And also I found safe spaces within corporate, like the employee resource groups and all the resources that diversity, equity, inclusion offices had to offer. Like those were my safe spaces. That was the only way I was able to survive corporate. And I actually had made the transition. I was working in human resources before because that was like the majority of my corporate background was working in human resources, being an HR generalist, all of the things. But I soon realized that there was a lot of gatekeeping going on, that it just, I didn't see myself having the most impact on helping people by being in HR. And I felt seeing more support in like spaces like communications or change management, or especially DE&I, because I felt like they were like business partners that were embedded all across the organization, not because they had to. I mean, of course, because you have to, but it's like everyone should be doing DE&I, regardless if they're in
Right.
HR, regardless if they're a product manager, right? Like it's everyone's job. And so I kind of wanted to be part of that space.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like those safe spaces were incredible for me. But candidly speaking, that can only do so much when it comes to your day-to-day job, and when certain organizations are going through a lot of changes and organizational pressures. Like we saw all of that go on, right? In 2020 and beyond, like just so many organizations shifting, what leadership is going to look like, what teams are going to look like. And thankfully for me at that time, I was able to have a lot of impact in the racial equity space, and literally being at the forefront of conversations of leading the DE&I strategy for the organization, as well as like how we're going to impact system impacted youth and how we're going to help them out of this really tough time, right? All of these things. But of course, over time, you saw a lot of organizations scaling back a lot of their racial equity efforts. And it kind of just made me feel like we were seeing a lot of slacktivism, which in Gen Z we say it's performative activism essentially. But I was proud that being part of an organization that was doing a lot of this great work was awesome. But then, of course, there were a lot of organizational changes happening that I didn't necessarily agree with. And for me, it was more than just the organization, right? Like I looked at my life again from that bird's eye view, like really looking at it from like, I'm my own business. I'm my own personal brand. How am I going to take care of myself and what I need to do before I go ahead and take care of this organization and my family and friends, right? And at that point, it's just like, wow, like my happiness, my peace is priceless. I can't put a price point on that. And
Yeah.
for me, it was just like, especially someone who has experienced so much loss in my life, it's like, I know I'm young and I know it's a risky decision, but I did make the choice to leave my corporate job. This was right before my 27th birthday, and that was my gift to myself. And it was risky, because I had a lot of people that were rooting for me within the organization and my family, right? Like, oh my gosh, you had this such big job. What are you thinking? What are you
Yeah.
saying? You're going to leave, you're going to quit, But for me, it was bigger than that. It was just like, I know what it's like for life to be so fleeting, and not having another day to pursue your dreams and the things that give you life. And while I loved my job and I had a lot of impact, it feels like it ran its course, to be honest with you. And it was just like, to be able to have that experience at such a young age, feeling like, wow, I had so much impact in this amount of time. What if I can do that between 24 and 26? What can I do between 27 and 30? And so in this next chapter of my life, I really wanted to explore entrepreneurship and really like apply all of the ins and outs that I learned working super high level in C-suite in a Fortune 500 organization and multiple Fortune 500 organizations that I've worked at in the past, and apply some of those learnings combined with my lived experiences. And so that's kind of where I am now on this entrepreneurship journey.
Okay, I want to pause here for a second to talk about Gen Z in the workplace. It's such a hot topic right now, these stereotypes and myths about this incoming group of folks in the work world. And what I often hear is that they are lazy or they are unprepared or they don't care about their jobs or they're never going to go the extra mile. And the reality is, yes, they are built different than millennials or Gen Xers or boomers. And that doesn't mean that they are or will always be some kind of terrible employee. Mimi really highlights some important truths here. Gen Zers are largely looking for real action from companies around inclusion, not the performative measures or the sweet sounding mission statements, but actual systemic change. And many of them are prioritizing themselves over a company. But this isn't about being selfish. It's actually rooted in a very real need for job security based on the economies and the historical moments that they've lived through during their really formative years. Now, if you want to learn more about these influences for each generation, I would encourage you to check out episode 32 of this podcast, Working Your Way. It's a career questions episode called How Can Different Generations Work Together? Now, at the end of the day, this is a generation who values individuality and authenticity, and fitting themselves into a corporate box doesn't always align with that value. In fact, most of the time it does not. So let's get back to the conversation where Mimi expands on how she adapted herself in the corporate world and how over time this really impacted her well-being and her mental health in a negative way to the point where she had to do something about it. One of the things that I hear from guests a lot is like when we're, whether it's code switching or masking or conforming to certain ways, it kind of slowly takes this toll on us, right? And it can lead to burnout and all sorts of other things. What impact did code switching and the conforming to a certain way of showing up and looking and talking and whatever it is, what impact did that have on you, whether it was physically, mentally, emotionally? Like, how did you feel at the end of the day in that moment?
It was killing me. It was killing me. Like literally my mental health got to such a low point, but I had no choice but to release this from my life, you know? And it wasn't because I don't want it to be like, oh, it's just about this organization, because it wasn't that. It was so many things, right? Like the pandemic, we're still in the heat of the pandemic during that time. It was the end of 2022. Like, so like on LinkedIn, you're constantly seeing people either leaving their jobs or getting laid off on social media. Like you're constantly inundated with all of these messages. And then there's people still dying from COVID and family members, like you're not able to go to funerals. Like it was too much that was contributing to not just code switching. It was like everything all together. And it felt like code switching was just like the cherry on top. It was like, if you hear the euphemism or the saying like death of 1,000 cuts, code switching is that last cut that will kill you.
Yeah.
And you just have to kind of get to that point where how much are you going to take, or how are you going to set your boundaries within the workplace, or whatever it is. I can't speak for anybody else, right? I can only speak for myself. And, you know, people have told me I've given up, like, oh, you shouldn't have done that. Oh, it's really, because I had made a post as well about me leaving my job. And it's like, oh, that wasn't professional. Oh, you have to be aware of burning bridges. And I'm just like, if the bridge is at risk of being burned anyways in the first place, let it burn. Like at the end of the day, the people who know me and know I would never have any malintent in my heart. And that is okay. Like I am going to bed at night peacefully because I made the decision that was best for me. I'm not living for other people. Like that's your life. That's what you want to do. Go ahead. You know, like go ahead with your bad self. That's fine. But for me, like I just know that my life is pulling me in a certain direction that is bigger than anything I've ever known. And it's bigger than anything that a lot of people in my close circle are not even doing, right? Like I'm literally creating, like, as you know, as an entrepreneur, you literally have to be a visionary. Like you have to see things before they even happen. And how are we going to make that happen? You need to make room, whether that's leaving a job or a relationship or whatever is taking up so much time and preventing you from being imaginative and creative. Like it just felt like I didn't have time for myself. And I'm such a creative person at heart that I need that time to rest and to rest my mind and to be creative. And to be quite honest with you, a lot of people need that. We need rest, because if we're constantly go, 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 how will we be creative? And to your point about burnout, like a lot of people within corporate spaces or organizations in general are so burnt out, it's preventing them from being creative, even just producing great quality work for the companies. So it's a critical conversation, and I don't play when it comes to my mental health. Like I do not. Like stress can manifest physically with diseases and metabolic conditions, and I've seen it time and time again with people who have died in my family. And like, I just don't want that to be my life.
I think when you lose somebody at an early age, it ingrains into you. It like codes it into your system that like life is short, right? And it's so cliche, right? But it's like this sense of perspective that like, if I'm not enjoying this time, like, what am I doing? I think I always, from day one of starting in corporate, was like, I'll be here until it no longer works for both of us, the company and me. Like, but if it doesn't work for the
Yeah.
company or it doesn't work for me, like, cool, we're good. We don't need each
Right.
other, And so I think it's a mentality that was ingrained in me because I saw my dad be really stressed out at work and that contribute to him passing in some way, right? And so I think it's definitely something that hits home for me.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, thank you for sharing it. I know, like, whether it's trauma bonding or trauma healing together, I'm here for all of it. So
Yeah,
thank you
I
for
like it.
that.
We need a better term for that, right? Trauma bonding. Okay, maybe there are some negative aspects to that, but also like
It's a lot of positive too.
the camaraderie and
Yeah.
the not even camaraderie, but the being seen, right? And feeling understood when we can be around people who like understand our lived experience is so
Oh,
powerful.
yeah. And well, to even connect that back to like working, right? And I've seen this just like with, if you think about all of the posts on social media from like 2020 to now, just the amount of content that is on either being laid off or, all of that. Like, I have to be super real here. My grief is honestly, like as mentioned before, was the main reason why I decided to quit my job. Like, granted, a job is a job, right? You have your work, you got to do what you got to do. Like, that's a given, right? But it got to the point where the layoffs that were happening was triggering my
Mhm.
grief, because it was like survivor's guilt, right? Like, obviously, thank goodness these people were alive and well, thank goodness.
Yeah.
But as a young person in an organization that is seeing their future mentors laid off, you're showing them they don't really have a future at your company, or it's going to be short-lived, or it's going to be constantly changing, and that's fine. I guess like young people were very adaptable and adjustable, but like that's not sustainable. First of all, but second of all, it just felt like it was bringing up a lot of grief for me. Like, I remember the times that I wasn't able to say goodbye and I couldn't talk to them. And that is like translatable to, when someone's access gets immediately shut off. Like, there's some real world implications when these things
Mhm.
happen within work. And for me personally, I couldn't take it anymore. And there were so many other young people that were sharing their stories on social media, that, to your point about camaraderie, like I felt seen, I felt validated, it felt like I had permission to make this decision for myself. And I was like, you know what? I've been through the worst of it already, in my humble opinion. My father died, my best friend died, my grandparents, my godmothers, my cousins. Like, I've already been through so much hell and back. I will be able to get through this and I will be okay.
I can also like hear kind of in this story, like, even though in this instance, like your position at work was safe and you were thought of well and were contributing a lot and things were really positive in general
Mhm.
for you, then seeing decisions that are being made that don't align with your values, that don't align with the way that you think that things should be done, there is this kind of psychologically distancing yourself from the work, right? A little bit of separation. And I think it's really hard
Yeah.
to find fulfillment and purpose at work when you're like, I don't believe in these things that are happening. Like, I'm not okay with this. I'm not aligned with this. So, how can I now still contribute at the same level that I was before?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I also want to recognize there's a lot of privilege in me making that decision, right? Like, I
Absolutely. Yeah.
wasn't married, I don't have kids, I don't own a home. So like, I honestly really admire the people who are able to, still provide for their families and are doing
Yeah.
what they have to do to survive. I get that. I 100% get that. And so I was like, you know what? I have this privilege. I'm not going to take advantage of it. Like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna do this. So I definitely like really
Do it.
appreciate the people who are maybe feeling similarly but are not in the space to make that decision, and that's a tough space to be in.
I want to call some attention to this conversation. So, Mimi was talking about seeing all of these things happening around her, decisions that were being made by a company that didn't align with what she thought was right or okay. These decisions that had people she was really connected to getting laid off. And yet she was still super successful in her role. She had a great manager. and she had internal support at a really high level. I think this is the perfect example to bring up something that's been bothering me for a little while now. There's that saying that people don't leave companies, they leave managers. And while, yes, bad managers do exist, and yes, there is data that says a manager's role is really critical in an employee's engagement level, I think we need to shift away from this being one of those kind of black and white blanket statements that we repeat over and over again. First, I think it's really hard right now to be a manager of people. Managing so many business and team dynamics with almost always a lack of resources to do it well. And this phrase has kind of become a way that a company can absolve itself from responsibility when great people leave. Well, people don't leave companies, they leave managers. So it must have been an issue in the reporting relationship. And second, I would say people do leave companies. I think that a great manager can keep someone there longer, but ultimately, if that manager doesn't have full control or influence on everything that happens, which typically they don't, when an employee gets or doesn't get a promotion that they deserve, or what benefits that employee gets access to, especially flexible working arrangements or exceptions for life and health challenges they may be facing, the person is probably going to go regardless of if this manager is the best human that they've ever worked for. If their needs aren't being met, or they're hitting a wall in advancement due to things that both the manager and the employee don't agree with, even with that manager advocating to the best of their ability to get the person what they need, and the company still won't or can't deliver it, it's going to happen. And I think we're going to continue to see this shift happen where even when a manager is great, there might be a values misalignment or a lifestyle and needs misalignment with the company. And people will leave a company that doesn't meet their needs, even when they have a great manager. I just want to have a moment of compassion for people managers. And I really hope that we see this shift in responsibility for retention be a lot more balanced moving forward, off of the individual and really looking at both the individual manager and the system in which they're working. Okay, my rant is over. Let's rejoin the conversation where we dive into Mimi's activism work and what exactly landed her the opportunity to work with such senior people at such a young age. Now, you were tapped at such a young age, a young tenure in the company to work for the chief diversity officer as a chief of staff. Like that is a job you work your way into typically. And so I'm curious, if you are looking back on it, what do you think they saw in you, or what do you think you were doing that kind of led to that happening?
Ooh, that's a good question. I've never been asked that before. Well, I guess I can do some like tone setting, I guess. So around that time, so it was like 2019 into the beginning of 2020. 2019, one of the absolute biggest moments in my life happened. And that is when President Obama invited me to be on stage with him to talk about all of the activism work that I was doing around that time, as well as, the work I was doing around youth mental health and social impact and social justice. And to be quite honest, I think that experience was the catalyst to me getting so much recognition at work because, being on that international stage, speaking in front of 400,000 people, essentially, right, with the previous president of the United States.
It's just kind of a big deal,
Crazy. Like I not only got to represent Hartford and my city, but I got to represent my community. I got to represent the company I was working for. And that was an honor. Like it was so awesome. And the news spread like wildfire, and it's interesting because at that time, I was in 2 leadership development programs. I was in the Obama Foundation Community Leadership Corps, which actually also happened in Chicago, where you are. I was selected for the Hartford cohort. And at the same time, I was in the Human Resources Leadership Development Program at Stanley Black & Decker. And so literally I'm in these in-betweens of worlds, being in a really radical, like grassroots organizing space and then like this corporate space. But at that time, I guess how I navigated is really trying to find the parallels on how to bridge these worlds together. Because for me, and what's really important is retention of young people at work. Like I really believe in providing like a clear and safe path for inner city youth and, you know, minoritized youth to have careers after they graduate college, if they do so decide to go to college. And so it's really important for me from that like organizational development lens to be able to be part of that vision and that work. And Stanley was doing incredible work in doing that and like helping youth in, you know, from the local centers of excellence, you know, where the headquarters were, into these jobs. So that is something I wanted to be part of. And so being part of the rotational program, it wasn't even 6 months before I graduated the program where the chief of staff, the chief diversity officer called my boss. Okay. Mind you, I'm in a very like basic level talent development specialist role. Okay. Like I loved my job. Like I was happy as a clam. I loved everything that I was doing.
You're just like
And
little entry-level Mimi, like doing my work,
yeah,
right?
you know, minding my business, you know, and my boss, Vanessa, she's like, so I just got a call from Joe and he said he wants you as your chief of staff. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? Like it was literally Friday. It was Friday at like 4 p.m. I was like, why? She's like, oh, can we talk really quick? I was like, what do you possibly have to say to me on a Friday afternoon?
You're like, oh
what?
no, am I getting fired? Yeah.
Yeah, like literally I was like freaking out. And then she says that, I'm like, what? So definitely a super huge moment of my life, and things quickly started to change quickly, very, very, very rapid fire. And I knew I was capable. I mean, I had a master's degree at that time. I graduated with my master. I was 21, turning 22. So I was qualified. I had the experience, you know, so it wasn't like, I will be honest with you, I never experienced imposter syndrome. I actually hate that word, to be quite honest with you. I think it's irrelevant and I think it's harmful to say imposter syndrome. Yeah. Really, it's, you know, you experience self-limiting doubt or like limiting beliefs or whatever, but imposter syndrome, I know I was no imposter. I'm like, if I'm getting called upon to do this job at this point in my life, I was meant to do it. It's meant for me. It's just a matter of how do I prove to other people and show them my worth? How do I show them what I already know within myself? And I'm like, and if the chief diversity officer is seeing it off of like one conversation that we were part of, like I facilitated a panel with him like a year prior, like just having that one interaction, and that kind of set me up for success. Like I know my worth. I just got to have other people see it so I can get to where I need to go. So it was really just like being delusional and self-belief and just like, you know, having that confidence, even though when my voice was shaky, and being in a lot of decision-making rooms where it was going to impact generations to come, I guess, in the workplace sense, you know, and just, yeah, undeniably believing in myself and not taking BS from anyone, because who else was going to advocate for me like that? Like of course I had mentors and sponsors that, you know, said my name in rooms that I wasn't in, and I will always be grateful for that. But it's also recognizing that I am powerful, I am qualified, I am meant to be in this space, and no one can take that away from me.
I think it's interesting because it's like you were brought into that role to tell the truth and be a leader, you know, and like that's why they wanted you to do that role.
Yeah.
And so it's like, now it's your duty to do it. You know, I think it's like, I think that inherently can give you some confidence. And like, if this is why they chose me, then I'm just going to do it. I'm going to be me.
And that's exactly what it did. That's exactly what it did.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet then you maybe find yourself proving yourself to other people that might not be in that line. Like what did proving yourself look like for you?
Yeah. And thank you so much for saying that, because my team, like the chief diversity officer, the diversity, equity, inclusion team, and our close partners, like the CEO, oh my gosh, the CEO of the company was like one of my biggest sponsors. Like he really believed in me, just having that exposure and stuff. So I had core people, the people that mattered, to be honest, the people that mattered believed in me. And that's why the work that we did was so impactful. But of course you have people within this different spaces that you know, it's just never been done before kind of thing. Like that
Yeah.
was the constant thing I heard, like, oh, just because it was never done before, why are we doing it now, essentially? And I'm like, well, just because it was never done before, this is the exact prime opportunity why we need to be talking about this, you know? So yeah, it was definitely a gift to be part of those types of conversations and things like that. But it was taxing. It was taxing on my spirit to have to prove myself like that. It just gets old, you know, and it gets tiring. And so I always pose the question now, being a consultant, how much time and resources are we wasting, right, by having young people or anyone else from a marginalized or minoritized or underestimated identity, they're spending so much time proving themselves and why they're worthy and why they're important and why their voice matters versus doing the actual work. So think about how much time and productivity we lose by doing that. It makes
Yeah.
leaders really, like, when I say that to them, they're like, oh, that's a good point. Like, yeah, so let's work together and do something about it. So, but yeah, thanks for asking. That was awesome.
Oh, you're welcome. So let's talk about grief sense. Let's talk about your entrepreneurial career. What is your vision for grief sense?
Oh, wow. Okay. Thank you for that. I knew it was coming, but it's just like, I hold it so close to my heart. And this question of like, what's the vision is so active right now because literally I have like a huge pitch competition / graduation coming up in a week or two. And I'm shitting bricks about it. I'll be honest. I am a little terrified, and it's just like one of those things to do it scared. And like I said,
Yeah.
I've spoken to huge audiences before. It's not so much that, it's just like this is something so vulnerable. Like I'm talking about grief, something that I've been through time and time and time again. And it's like just being in that vulnerable space again, you know? So it's not easy, but it's worth it. And so essentially my vision with Grief Sense is really creating a safe space for young people navigating grief. I do have a hyper focus on minoritized identities as well as people who are in the creative space, just because that's how I identify. And it's really something I just wish a resource like Grief Sense existed when I was younger. And I know I'm still young, but like, it's like, I know that this is going to be a valuable resource for other people. And it's just something I wish I had. And to that point is also creating something that will outlive me. And this term legacy is always on my mind when it comes to anything in life. It's just like, is what I'm doing right now contributing to the legacy I want to leave behind? Like me leaving my corporate job, me deciding to go after entrepreneurship, me deciding to go to college, like all of these public speaking, like all of these decisions, the person I'm going to marry, like all of these life decisions we make contribute to the legacy we're leaving behind. And I know one thing to be true, like when we die, we cannot bring anything with us. Literally, the only thing we leave behind is our story, is our legacy. And so that is what I want to remind people of, as, you know, on Grief Sense, as we honor, you know, the losses that people have experienced. Like I interview folks on the show like you, because you're going to be on it, when they talk about and share their grief stories. But I've always just had this fascination or obsession around the exploration of how they're navigating life after loss. What did you create in honor of that loss? What were you able to do? What's the impact you were able to have? What safe spaces were you able to contribute or provide to other people when they're going through like the hardest time of their life? So for me, nothing else matters, to be honest with you. Like Grief Sense, my family, my friends, like that's what I care about right now. Because there's a youth mental health crisis. And I honestly don't think that there's anything else more important than the youth mental health crisis right now. And that hits so many levels, that hits so many communities. Like, I just feel like that has to be everybody's priority. And the fact that it's not, well, that's why I'm doing Grief Sense. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I feel like this is very meta in a sense of you're creating a platform about how we deal with death that will live on beyond your own death. Like, it's like, well, it's a lot, you know? And that's like, it's amazing.
Multi-layered, and like, and
Yeah.
it all boils down to the loss of my father, because growing up, like, so my father died when I was 8 months old, and obviously I've gone on to lose a lot more people, but my origin point to grief is, or my gang initiation right into grief was losing my dad. And growing up, I didn't have pictures of him. I didn't have videos. I don't know what his voice sounds like. I don't know what his laugh sounds like. I've never was able to hug him, but like, just not being able to have remnants of who he was as a person was like the biggest trauma point for me. And so I made it a point to try to find ways to connect with him even after he's died, and provide a space to other people. Hey, like, even if you don't have a lot of your person that has passed away, you can still connect with them by honoring them, right? And so now no one can say, I mean, now we have social media, so now we can have pictures and videos of people. That wasn't something that existed
Yeah.
as much in the 90s or early 2000s. So but now I have a podcast. People can tune in whenever they want. My family has something of me. If I were to die today, I will die peacefully, because they have so much content from me now. So it's a gift, but it's
Yeah.
also real that a lot of people don't spend a lot of time thinking about.
Wow. I hadn't thought about in your story how media plays a role in your presence being around when you didn't have that from your dad. You didn't have
Yeah,
any kind of media presence, right? A picture, a sound, a video.
nothing,
Yeah,
nothing.
that's beautiful. Let's take a deep breath, everybody. Talking about grief and loss and legacy is some really real stuff. And I love how Mimi is just able to go into the depths and talk about all of it. It's something that I find a lot of healing in myself as I think about the important people in my life that I've lost, including, like I mentioned, losing my dad when I was 14 years old. As humans, we're meant to grieve in community with others, not alone with our journals. Although I do certainly support whatever solo practices you have for navigating your emotions, but grief is a shared experience, and I have personally found a lot of healing in talking about mine, both privately and publicly. It's something that Mimi is creating a space for with her podcast, and I love that. Now, for me, losing a few very important family members far too early in life has really shaped how I live my life and the risks that I take and the things that I want to experience and the importance I place on what I do and how happy and fulfilled I am while doing it. Now, of course, it's super cliched, but experiencing the death of somebody close to you is a reminder that life is short and unpredictable. And what are we doing with our days? And I think in today's world, we don't really think about legacy until we're much older. And naturally, if you have kids, there's a kind of built in answer to this question of what you're leaving behind in this world or how your impact on the world is going to live on. But our legacy is and can be so much more. It's something to reflect on for yourself. Who are you outside of any roles that you play for others? Or what impact do you want to leave behind that will outlast you? Okay, maybe another deep breath. And let's pivot a bit and talk about the big things that Mimi is doing with this platform of griefsense and the entrepreneurial work that she's doing beyond that, and how she is showing up authentically in her career today. So, as you build your entrepreneurial career, you build this platform around griefsense and expand it into whatever vision it's going to become in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And you're also doing some consulting with organizations around young people at work and belonging and inclusion.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So basically, how right now I'm kind of bridging the worlds of my consulting work with Grief Sense. So right now I'm
Mm,
planning a big conference called the Grief Sala. So
mm,
sala in Spanish means living room. And it's really where the living are, talking about the dead, but also about like their grief and how my biggest like connection point to my consulting work. So how I like to say what my role is, definitely base foundation level, it's an organizational development consultant, but narrowing down a little bit more, I'm a Gen Z inclusion consultant. And I also do like social impact consulting and like anti-oppressive copywriting. That's kind of like what my brand is on LinkedIn. A lot of people know me for my language matters posts, just educating people on reframing outdated language.
And you get a lot of opinions in those posts. I've seen them.
Oh yeah, but hey, it's discussion, right? Like it's just as long as
Totally.
there's a dialogue going on and it's top of people's mind, like, hey, you should probably be reframing certain things. Like I'm here for it. I'm not here to change everything about you or your language. I'm here to, hey, here's what I learned. What do you think about it? Let's have a talk about it, you know. But yeah, so with the youth mental health crisis going on, I'm like, okay, how can I found myself like how I was in corporate. How can I use my lived experience so I can navigate corporate life? Okay, how can I use my corporate experience and my lived experience on how to, you know, solve the youth mental health crisis as well as, you know, Gen Z retention. These are all really big concepts, but how I'm making sense of them is as I'm able to do some consulting work with corporate organizations and nonprofit organizations and really helping leaders understand and how to connect with Gen Z. I'm like, hey, you know, I also do this work where if you have any young employees that are grieving or are experiencing tough mental health challenges, I have a phenomenal resource with the podcast, of course, but with this conference. So right now my strategy is trying to get some corporate sponsors and kind of really leverage that as like a retention mechanism for young people specifically within Connecticut. Of course, I want to help the youth all over the world, but you got to start with where you are. And right now I'm here. So until someone wants to fly me out and make me stay in LA, I'm operating from Harvard.
And we put something out and we prototype it and we experiment and we refine and then we
Exactly.
grow, right? So it
Yep.
will be eventually everywhere, I'm sure.
Yes.
So as you are navigating this entrepreneurial moment in your career, what does showing up authentically mean for you? What does it look like day to day, or what does it sound like?
That's a great question. Yeah, I definitely feel being an entrepreneur, I can definitely be more authentic because I have more of that personal brand that I've been nurturing over time with my content and things. And I do feel the more followers and the more my personal brand grows, the more I realize like with great power comes great responsibility, right? And responsible storytelling is so important to me. And I know that based on how my engagement on social media is going right now, it's going to blow up really soon. It's already starting to happen on LinkedIn. And, you know, I'm just getting ready for that. But in the meantime, it's like I really care about responsible storytelling. So for me, how that looks like is just making sure I'm educating myself and on all the things that I want to do while also being a representation for someone that might be younger. Like, wow, I see this person talking about that on LinkedIn. Maybe I can do the same thing. That's what it's all about. It's not because I'm disagreeing with what this organization is doing and this marketing campaign should have said this word instead of that one. Like, no, it's deeper than that. It's like, because I am, someone else will be. Because someone else was, I am. So that's really what's top of mind for me when it comes to, you know, social media, personal branding, all of the things. Like, because we are, someone else will be. And that's a powerful thing if you let it, right? But it's just something I pay attention to particularly.
Yeah, I believe very, very deeply in that kind of ripple effect, or in the permission that we can give to people when we show up a certain way, or just are ourselves, and you know that becomes a thing that people see. As someone who, for me, is a very structured and linear thinker, sometimes I need to see something in order to know that it's possible. And so having a role model like you, or you know, just like seeing how you're showing up in the world can really like have that kind of exponential impact.
Yeah, and like, you know, there's a lot of voices on LinkedIn that made it possible for me to do that. And like, if I wasn't on LinkedIn and I wasn't intentionally searching, like, how would I know, right? But I also want to say something super important too, because I don't want it to be like, oh, I don't think that people can't be authentic if they're working in the workplace. Like, I think definitely people can, they just have to find those safe spaces to like encourage them to be authentic. But the other thing is like, you have to nurture your personal brand whether you have a job or not, because that's what's going to protect you in the event that you find yourself not being able to be within a certain workplace, or if you find yourself about to get laid off. Like, having that personal brand is going to have your back if you are nurturing it, right? And like, so much of our reputations are wrapped up within the company or organization that we work at, that when we do leave, oh, we were just focused on announcing, oh, I just got a job here. Now I just lost that job. But you weren't posting or like engaging with other people on the platform meaningfully. And now you have to start from scratch. So I always preach to young people now. So part-time, I'm also a director of career development, and I am supporting students that are in college kind of transitioning into their careers now, you know, with organizations like Stanley and other corporate organizations, that, hey, start posting now, like start building that personal brand now so that you can get noticed, right? Like, post what you care about, right? And the other thing is, companies and organizations can literally leverage that to the best of their ability, but they're so like sometimes living in that lack or like that scarcity mindset, and they're fearful that if they like promote their employees' content, if they're a content creator on the side, that's a bad thing. Dude, if anything, if you have an employee who has a lot of engagement on social media, they're shouting your company out, and they have a lot of reach, there's so many organizations that are sleeping on that, and it would be able to help them nurture their brand, reach other young people or whatever community they're trying to reach. Like, it's honestly genius if organizations can maximize that, but they're too busy being like, oh, this is how we do things, and that's going to keep you stuck in the past. So, yeah.
It's so true. And I actually see this, a lot of this, like in marketing right now too, where it's like a company, if they're getting like bad press about something, that they want to like squash that down and get rid of it and wipe it out, instead of like taking that and making a joke out of it, or like bringing it, actually, like, exactly, own it, and then leverage it. You know, it's like this idea of, I mean, like you said, right? Bring your full self to work is this really terrible phrase when a company doesn't actually mean it. So if you're going to say it, now you have an employee who has a platform, a message, their own brand. Think about that as an asset and not as a liability, right?
Period. Yes.
So how do you know today, in these days, in this moment in your career, how do you know when you're maybe not bringing your full self to something, or like showing up the way that you want to show up? Do you have any indicators, or is there something that you notice about yourself when you might be holding back or masking or any of that kind of stuff?
I don't know if this sounds like a bad answer, but I have not experienced that in about a year.
It's great,
because I've curated my life to be the way it is right now intentionally, so that I don't have to deal with that. And like, I mean, there are moments, right, like on social media, or I don't know, but it's like, I'm so sure of myself now, and I feel like I'm just so confident in where I'm going and the direction that I'm going, that as long as I stay committed to that mission and that vision, I don't care what anyone else thinks of me, first of all. Second of all, it's like, no, I don't know. I just feel like I'm unapologetically myself, and I will continue to do that. And like, of course, there's certain ways to express your message, whether I'm talking to the president of the United States or I'm talking to the janitor or the mailman. I'm going to give you the same answer in a way that you will understand, but I'm not going to alter how I show up for your comfort or palatability. That's not my problem. That is not my responsibility.
I do think there's an important point though in what you just said around, and I talk about this too, because I mean, like, obviously this podcast is all about authenticity and navigating the complexity of it, right? It's not a be yourself 100% and everything's great, or don't be yourself at all. It's like there's always this gray area, there's a spectrum, there's
Mm-hmm.
layers, there's all the things, right? And so the idea that you can still be authentic even if you demonstrate some range in your communication style.
Yeah.
Effective communication is saying something in a way that someone else can receive it, and different people are going to receive different things in different ways.
Yep.
That does not mean you're not being authentic. But then where do you see the distinction between something like code switching versus exercising range in how you show up?
Well, for me, or like just in general, like I guess for me,
For you,
like
yeah.
if I find myself like sometimes I'll catch myself like if I'm about to make a post on LinkedIn and I'm like, I should probably say it this way. Oh no, why would I do that? I have to say like honor my tone of voice kind of thing. Like I still have
Yeah.
those moments that come up where I feel like I need to, or even now having a part-time job, like I'm now back into like a workplace setting, even though it's not my full-time capacity. Like I still do find myself like, I probably shouldn't say it like that. I have to kind of still say the same message, but say it in a way that they'll understand. So I guess that's how it shows up for me currently. But literally in the past, I would outright just completely conform, right? Like wear a certain outfit to work and like make sure my hair's done a certain way, right? Whereas like now I do a lot of public speaking. I'm invited to a lot of conferences and universities and events to speak. I will pull up with my Air Force Jordan 1s, like, and some cargo jean pants and like a crop top, like, like, and my good friend Pavel Martinez, he owns a podcast called Quien Tu Eres, and his whole mission is that professionalism is subjective, right? Like it's kind of like professionalism is defined differently for other people. I also feel like generationally, like generations also plays a role in this, because what is professional for like a baby boomer and a Gen Xer is definitely not the same as professional for someone in Gen Z or being a millennial. So I'm seeing a lot of these different ways on kind of like this range and this balancing act of like conformity and like, saying something that's palatable for someone to understand. And I think it's going to be something that's an ongoing journey. But I feel like as long as you are honoring your voice and recognizing how you want to show up, not just trying to please someone else, but like, does this fit into your long-term journey or the vision on where you want to be? Like, if you want to be in corporate for the rest of your career, I do think, unfortunately, you will have to perform a certain way. If you're trying to be like a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, it's, depending on who the organization is, like, I don't know. I feel like you are going to have to perform in a certain way versus being an entrepreneur. I feel like you definitely, like, even though you partner with CEOs and other organizations, you have more creative freedom on how you can show up and honor your authentic voice. So I don't know. I feel like I'm gonna kind of see this as time goes on, and I'm still young. I'm still learning myself, right? These are just some observations. But how about you? Like, how do you feel about that with like your career and things that you see?
Yeah, I think the thing that comes up for me, and you said this not in these same words, but it was the same insight, is that am I shifting the way that I show up in service of me, in service of something that I want to accomplish, or a message that I want to convey, or a connection that I want to build? But like, am I moving my interests forward? Am I communicating something more effectively to someone so that they will receive it and that will help me get this thing done, right? Or influence this thing.
Yeah.
I see that more as like, yes, we do. We're not one demeanor all the time, right? So we can flex and we can do those things. Now, if I'm changing myself in service of something external, in service of a company, or making people comfortable, or pleasing my boss, or not rocking the boat in a meeting, I think that's where it's inauthentic and not being effective and having range. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's kind of where
That's a good conversation.
I land on it. Yeah. Let me just say that this is a complex conversation. And as Mimi said, and as I've said many times on and off this podcast, authenticity is a journey, and that journey looks different for each one of us. But I want you to reflect on that question of, when am I adapting, growing, evolving, flexing in service of my own growth or goals, versus when am I changing myself or conforming to fit someone or something else's expectations or limitations that they might want to place on me? I'm going to dive more into this topic in the wrap up. So stay tuned for that if you want to explore this further for yourself. So, as we wrap up, I'm really curious, what are your go-to tools or resources or the things? I mean, this is a big conversation for you because I know you've done a lot of emotional development work and internal work, and like you've been through it, right? So, what helps you show up at your best and to be you?
I feel like that's something I'm still learning and growing and evolving, but the main activity that I do that just brings me a lot of peace of mind is journaling. I feel like ever since a young age, I've been very in tune with myself. And I think just because with grief, and like, mind you, these are not just people I lost, right? Like losing 20 people before 25 are also the same people that my mom has lost, that my cousins and my siblings have lost. And just really recognizing that my relationship with my traumas are different, to someone else that might be close to me that also has a connection point to the same trauma. And the way I internalized it was by writing and creating and doing music and just doing creative expression, protesting, being in community with people. Like, I need to feel free within my thoughts. Like, the moment I feel restricted and feel like I have no out, it'll make me shut down. And so I knew that there was a lot of spaces around me, whether that was work, whether that was school, even being within my own family. Like, there wasn't an out for me to, or a safe space. So I had to create that for myself. So that was through writing for me. So journaling, for sure. Listening to other podcasts. My favorite podcaster or podcast right now is with Hindsight. His name is Hines on YouTube.
I don't know that one.
He's just so good about just mental, like mindset. And I think half the battle of being an entrepreneur is mindset. Like, you have to be in a certain mindset to be able to do all of these things that we're saying, right? So my fiance, he's actually an entrepreneur as well. He's like a serial entrepreneur and he's very successful. And one of the things that he has told me that it like lives in my head rent free. It takes up too much real estate in my brain. He says, similar to working out, like, you can't just work out on the days you feel good. It's like literally working on the days you don't feel good, that's going to make the difference. It's the same thing with your business. You can't only create content. You can't only have a meeting. You can't only do all of these business responsibilities when you feel good. You have to do it even on the days where you don't, because that's how you make progress. That's how you grow, right? And so I still honor, like, the difference between when I was an employee to now being an entrepreneur is like, I have the time to honor my body and rest. I have time to be like, I can't do this meeting today. I'm going to move it to another day. Like, I have more of that creative freedom on my schedule. And I don't want this to sound like it's an option, because it's not a luxury to have rest. Like, it's a given right.
Yeah.
And just the fact that I've created and curated my life to be what it's like right now, I think is how I'm able to just show up in my best way. And the last thing I'll say is, because of all of the loss that I've experienced, is being present with my family. Like, that is time I will never get back. I will literally, like, my best friend just had a baby. If I was still working a regular job, I would not be able to help her raise the baby. I would not be able to help her out and run errands. Or like, my mom just got surgery this week. Like, I wouldn't be able to go home and help her out because I would be too busy, working for someone else. So I am so grateful for this time of my life. And I don't know, maybe I'll work for a company in the future. Who knows? Maybe there could be an amazing job waiting for me in the future, or it can be an amazing consulting opportunity, or griefsense will take off. Like, I think the whole point of it is like I'm open, but where I am right now, I've worked really hard and I had to make a lot of hard decisions and sacrifices to show up the way I am showing up today. And all of that wouldn't have happened if I didn't also make intentional time to be present with my friends and my family and myself. Like, we're only getting older. More people are going to die in our lives, and we never know when that time's going to come. So do you really have to take that next project or that next meeting, or can you go spend some time with your siblings right now and bring them to the beach? Like, those are the things I'm thinking about right now, even as I scale my startup. So, yeah.
We're in a moment right now where the value of status and money, and this is coming from a place of privilege that I can say this, right? But I think the value of status and money is equalizing a little bit to the value of like time and freedom and flexibility and health. And if we are so fortunate to have the opportunity to balance that scale out, I think we should do it. You know, it's like, I think it's so important, and reframing what success looks like.
Exactly. And not measuring your success by someone else's ruler, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's not wrong to work in corporate. It's not wrong to be an entrepreneur. It's not wrong to be a professor or be a wildlife rehabilitator. Like, it's whatever it is, like whatever you want to do that and do it great. Do it with love, do it with presence, like do it with gratitude, like whatever you decide to be in this life, as long as you are, you know, impacting your community in a positive way and uplifting people, who cares what you do? Like, just don't cause harm and like be a good person, you know, provide a safe space for other people. And that's really all I'm trying to do. But the biggest message to me that I always tell people, and it's the mantra of griefsense, is that life is a privilege. We need to act accordingly, you know. And one of my favorite quotes is, if you have nothing to be grateful for, check your pulse. So literally whenever I'm having like that intense panic, because that happens a lot, the amount of anxiety attacks that I have throughout a given week, it should be illegal, but you know, anxiety. But I often check my pulse and I'm like, you know what? My heart is beating. My lungs are breathing. I'm here. This is an opportunity maybe that I need to slow the F down and maybe take a little nap. I need to take a little walk outside, or I need to just reset, right? But I'm here and I'm alive. And that's an opportunity that a lot of our ancestors and people that have died in our lives don't have. They don't have that privilege, right? And it's a lot of people that, you know, in Palestine and Congo and Sudan don't have the opportunity and the privilege that we have right now. So it's like, with this privilege, let's, you know, take advantage of this for something else that other people always take for granted. So yeah, what are you doing with your privilege? That is life. That's what I want to know.
Perspective. It's really beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Thank
that.
you. Thanks for having me, man. This was great.
I appreciate you being on, and I appreciate just your voice in this world and the work that you're doing. And you really are creating the ripple effect. And it's going to be exciting to see where it goes and how much bigger it gets.
Thank you. I'm manifesting that. I am a firm believer in like publicly manifesting. So if y'all want to help me get on Forbes 30 under 30 in this last year of my life, because I'm turning 29 and I won't be eligible for Forbes 30 under 30 anymore, help me.
The clock is ticking. The clock is ticking.
Help me manifest that. Help me manifest that the Grief Sala conference will be a huge annual conference and homecoming for creatives and like all of the things. And also that your podcast will grow and your brand will grow, and that, you know, the most important thing is that we are making our fathers proud. And I know we are with the work that we're doing.
Okay. Yep. That last part is still making me tear up. I have to say that I am so excited when I meet people like Mimi who are blazing a new trail and really doing things differently, especially at such a young age. In this episode, we talked about equity and inclusion in the corporate world. We talked about death and loss and how we can navigate grief and how it changes us and can never really be separated from who we are. And we got into how Mimi is showing up fully today in her work, building her own brand and the brand of griefsense, and driving progress in the youth mental health space. It was a really amazing conversation and one that not only covered a lot of ground, but also had a lot of depth. And I'm not quite ready to let you off the hook in that area yet. I want to dive a little deeper into what it means to be authentic at work. We're all dynamic human beings and we're always changing and hopefully growing and evolving. And we do need to adapt to different settings or situations. And when we can do this without losing ourselves, that's really the sweet spot between being yourself and expanding your range as a person or expanding your effectiveness as a leader. Now, I talked about this concept, the idea of assimilation versus conformity, in episode 24, the one about personal branding, and how we have to assimilate to some extent anytime that we're operating within a system, whether it's a social system or a workplace or a country that we live in. And if you want to dig into that, I would encourage you to check out that episode. Again, it's a career questions episode all about personal branding, episode 24. But for today, I want to talk about when am I adapting and growing and evolving and flexing in service of my own goals or my own growth versus when am I changing myself to conform to fit someone or something else's expectations or limitations they want to place on me. It's kind of navigating that line between adaptability and inauthenticity. So I want you to think about your identity and what is intrinsic to your identity, to who you are. And this can be parts of our social identity like race, gender, age, culture. It can be things that we value, what we care about, how we spend our time. I'm a runner or a reader or a gardener. It can be who we are to others, like the roles that we play as a parent or a sibling or a child or a caregiver, or things that we know about ourselves, like habits or behavioral patterns. Some of mine, I'm female, I'm Indian, I'm heterosexual, I'm in my 40s, I'm a first generation American, born here from an immigrant family. I'm a daughter, a sister, a trip planner, a party host, a people connector, a knowledge seeker, and someone who inspires growth in others. I'm also always late to dinner. I have a deep fear of failure and rejection, and I sometimes compartmentalize my emotions in order to get stuff done. Now, all of these things are really part of who I am today, and some of these things are parts that I kind of want to work on and that don't need to be part of who I am in a year. And so this is how we can think about when am I changing myself to try to fit a box, like conforming, or when am I potentially encountering a growth edge that's something that I can work on that will actually expand my range and how I communicate or how I show up or how I can influence others. For example, I can work on my speaking style as maybe a development area in a company or in my job. But if I'm being asked to change something about how I communicate that's really intrinsic to my race or to my culture, this is where it gets into asking us to abandon our identity, to code switch, to mask, or to conform. And this is the space that managers and companies need to be really cognizant of. What's important here is that it's about flexing your style versus changing in a way that's abandoning some part of your identity that's intrinsic to you. So I'd encourage you to identify an area where you might want to grow or evolve, because authenticity is about knowing who you are today, but it's also about knowing where you want to go and how you want to grow. And I would ask yourself, how can I shift a part of me that I want to change or evolve without abandoning the other very important parts that make me who I am?